Hello, everybody. Are we all here who wants to be here? Right, Anthony. Well, he doesn't need an introduction, but there's something I'd like to say about Anthony. And you know, you've all seen his channel, how brilliantly he's bringing out this knowledge. And probably what you don't know is how amazingly generous this guy is with his time and with his support. I get emails, you know, I used to get emails, oh, I've seen you on your channel or whatever, can I have a consult? Now it's always, I've seen you on Dr. Chaffee's channel, or Dr. Chaffee's told me about you, and this is a massive honour, and I'm not joking when I say, and Anthony probably doesn't know, that he probably fed my kids for about the last 18 months with the amount of referrals he's had for my consults, and I'm really honoured and grateful about that. Lovely guy, brilliant. Brilliant speaker, and Anthony, honoured to have you here. Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm really glad that everybody's here. I'm glad to be here as well. I've been looking forward to this all year. So hopefully you like this. I put together sort of 3 topics that I think are kind of interesting. I don't necessarily go one from the other, but they're things that I like to think about, and they're things that I present to people and present to my, at least for the first 2, present to my patients as well. So we'll get through these, and if we have time, depending on how long they go, I might go into an older talk that I've done before, because there are some people here that haven't actually come to that. I've more and more people are just basically being dragged here by their relatives. So they may not have seen some of the arguments as to why the hell these crazy people don't eat vegetables. And so I might go into that. First of all, I want to talk about autoimmunity. So autoimmunity is something that is affecting more and more people. This is something that's getting more and more prevalent in younger and younger decades of life, and is more and more prevalent in society. So this is not something that's just genetic. You're going to have X number of people per annum that are going to have this. This is getting more and more and more prevalent. That means there's something in the environment that's affecting us, and I think there's actually pretty concrete evidence as to what that is. At the moment, the going theory is that this is due to molecular mimicry. What is molecular mimicry? Molecular mimicry is when your body attacks something. We usually think of this in the context of viruses or bacteria. Our body mounts an immune response to that virus or bacteria. Those antibodies are close enough to one of our own antigens, meaning something that we would attack, that it makes a cross reaction, and then our body gets sensitized to that and says, ooh, here's another threat, let's go kill it. And makes more dedicated antibodies towards that antigen in our body. And so that's a model that I was taught in medical school for type 1 diabetes, that have some sort of viral illness, and then your body gets sensitized to your beta islet cells in your pancreas, and your body just says, kill it. Well, that might explain type 1 diabetes, where you've wiped out these cells. It doesn't always wipe them all out, actually, which is interesting. They have this honeymoon period where you actually can get them back. But this is, I don't think this is actually what's going on. It doesn't explain other autoimmune diseases. So I think that I'm going to sort of make 3 arguments that this really can't happen this way by molecular mimicry for 3 main reasons. First is that if it's sensitized to an organ or to anything, your immune system doesn't stop. It doesn't stop attacking that thing, like that bacteria or that virus or that whatever, until it's gone, until it's wiped it out. And so you would invariably wipe out whatever organ you're attacking. If you have Hashimoto's, you would just keep going until it was destroyed. You wouldn't have a fluctuation. You have those antibodies going up until the thyroid was destroyed and the threat was eliminated. You don't see that. You see this fluctuation. It goes up and down. You see people going to periods of remission and then relapse and all these other sorts of things. So that's not really how it would work. Also, when we see in clinical practice, and we've seen a lot of people here, like Phil and others have spoken about, if you eat something differently, all of a sudden those autoimmune issues go away, those antibodies go away. So what's happening there? If your body was sensitized to your own body, then it wouldn't just stop there, just by removing something else because you haven't removed your organ, right? So that doesn't make sense. Also, there's one thing that not everybody realizes or understands, even most doctors, is that the immune system actually is not capable of doing that. I took postgraduate level immunology before I went to medical school. Not everybody does that, and I'm glad I did, because one of the very clear things from that class, probably one of the few things I remember from that class, was that can't happen. And autoimmunity never sat right with me. The idea of molecular mimicry never sat right with me for this reason, because when you're maturing your immune cells in your bone marrow and your thymus, those new immune cells that can make these antibodies are tested against every single potential antigen, protein, etc. Every molecule that your body is capable of making are tested against these new cells. And if there's even a weak affiliation, they are killed. So the mature immune cells that are released into the system are incapable of making an antibody that would then even have a weak cross-reaction with your body. They can make an antibody towards a virus, but it's not capable of making an antibody towards that virus that would then have a weak cross-reaction. It's not capable of doing that. So that never made sense to me either. Now, the only way that would work is if you had some sort of breakdown of that mechanism of weeding out these cells. And that's possible, but I don't think there's any evidence of that. You have to have something fundamentally wrong. And maybe there could be. Maybe there's something that's fundamentally damaging our body's ability to make these immune cells. But again, the same pattern emerges. If you change your lifestyle, if you change your environment, then you start getting immune cells that are incapable of doing that, and these autoimmune issues go away, which we see again and again. Celiac disease is a very good example of this. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease, but it's one that is precipitated by gluten, which is a lectin, which is a plant toxin. And lectins in general are strongly associated with autoimmunity. And these are a protein with a carbohydrate substructure that can bind to several different proteins and carbohydrate structures on our cells, binds them, damages them. This is a leading cause of leaky gut, which can cause these permeability of our small intestine and allow other lectins, bacteria, other sorts of things that would never be allowed in our body normally into our bloodstream. And now these lectins, which can stick onto our intestinal cells, can now get to every other cell in our body, and they can stick to other organs. And what I propose is that that's actually what's happening, that these lectins or other toxins or glyphosate or whatever are getting into our body, attacking our organs, and our body is doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is defend and attack these attackers. And they make antibodies towards them, and then our body's getting hit in the crossfire. We see this with celiac disease because gluten sticks onto these antigens on our enterocytes, on our intestinal cells, damages them, causing leaky gut, etc. And then we mount an immune response towards them, and you get these antibodies that come and attack. But they don't attack unless the gluten's there. When you remove the gluten, that's not a problem anymore. So you can see this on histology. You take a biopsy and you'll see the villi, which are the sort of finger-like projections, and there's microvilli, which are fingers on the fingers, and that massively increases the surface area of absorption. And so when you get damage to the enterocytes and the villi and microvilli, you get flattening of this, and so you get a very difficult time absorbing nutrients, etc. You'll get malabsorption issues and malnutrition issues, even if you're eating a very, very healthy diet, just because of that gluten. But once you stop eating the gluten, that problem goes away because your body has nothing to attack anymore because it's not being attacked itself. The antibodies still exist. It's not like they just went away. They're still there. They're still in your system. They're in your circulation, but they just have nothing to attack anymore. So they don't. And I think that's exactly what's happening with these other autoimmune diseases. I have, well, hundreds of patients with autoimmunity. I know Sophia has thousands probably, and we see the exact same thing. When you change their environment, when you change their diet, these autoimmune issues largely go away, or at least improve dramatically. And you can measure this. Hashimoto's, you can measure directly the antibodies that the body is making towards your thyroid, and they come down. They invariably come down. People are very strict with their diet. They're exclusively eating red meat and water, and there's a reason for that I'll come to. Yeah, and again, the immune system really can't attack its own body, not normally anyway. And you know, if someone's making the argument that our immune system is bypassing that channel, then they really don't have to actually show evidence of that, and I don't think there is any. So there's this idea of certain diets that we should follow. The AIP diet is one of them. That probably helps certain people because you're cleaning up your diet, you're not eating processed garbage, and you eat a more whole food approach, but it's very plant-based. You're eating a lot of plants and vegetables. And I would argue that a lot of the problem can come from vegetables, or the things that are on vegetables. Like glyphosate, we heard that can trigger autoimmunity potentially as well. So what you want to do is you want to get rid of these toxins. So lectins are strongly associated with autoimmunity. We know that A-lectin, gluten, wheat germ gluten, will cause celiac on autoimmune disease. And so I would argue that it's these other toxins that are doing the same, or other toxins entirely. So the point is you want to clear out all of these toxins and not put them into your body. They're not going to be absorbed. They're not going to damage your gut. You're not going to have leaky gut in the first place. So your autoimmune issue will go away because your body won't have anything to attack, because it is attacking the lectins or the toxins that are attacking you. They're doing exactly what your immune system is doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is protect you. It's just your cells, your tissue are getting hit in the crossfire. That's what I think anyway. Why ruminant meat? Well, if you look at the gut system here of the monogastrics, like a pig or a chicken or a fish or a people, you'll see that it just goes down to a stomach. They have in rapid succession the small intestine, large intestine, etc. It's not like the ruminant that has this multi-barreled foregut that is able to ferment and break down different toxins and draw out more nutrients to lower the toxic load and bring out more bioavailability. If they're eating what they're designed to eat, this works great. Even if they're eating things they're not designed to eat, like grains, it also works great. Not as great, but it works great. This is why we ferment things. This is why we've been traditionally fermenting plants. Basically, as long as we've been eating plants, we've been fermenting them or cooking them or mixing chemicals with them to try to denature some of these toxins, lower the toxic load, and bring out the bioavailability. Cows do that for us, and then they absorb the now more safe nutrients as well. The monogastrics can't really do that, so they'll actually absorb a lot of these toxins as well, including glyphosate. Monogastrics have been shown to absorb glyphosate, and that can get into the meat and the fat, etc., and then we get that by proxy. There was a recent article that actually suggested that ruminants may actually be able to break down glyphosate in their rumen in that fermentation process so it doesn't absorb. Still a bit preliminary, but that might be another reason why this is. So this can reverse leaky gut, no gluten, casein, alcohol, other sorts of potential toxins that can cause this leaky gut, and then you won't have these invaders in the first place. Glyphosate, like I mentioned, and this has allowed people like myself and many others in this room to reverse diseases that are currently thought to be irreversible, but they're not. I have well over 100 patients with Hashimoto's disease, every single one that follows a strict ruminant meat and water diet, and I also get them to exercise and improve their sleep and get out in the sun and do all these other sorts of things, but they have to be very strict on the diet. No dairy, no anything, no chicken, no egg, nothing. Just red meat and water for best results. And the ones who are able to do that invariably will reduce their antibodies at very appreciable rates. So very recently I had a lady who her antibodies, had TPO antibodies and TG antibodies. The TPO went from 650 down to 50 in about 8 months of strict lion diet, red meat and water, and her TG went from 50 to 0. So it takes a while, but it does come down to nothing eventually, as long as you're strict. And so it's like any other immune reaction. If you have a virus or something or whatever, and your body is attuned to that, you're making antibodies towards it, after it clears that bacteria infection or whatever, it still circulates a lot of antibodies because it's just looking to mop up anything else. And so it's primed and ready to go. So if you get exposed to that same pathogen again, it's probably not going to get a foothold, right? And eventually that will come down. Well, that's, I think, what's happening with autoimmunity. That's why it takes 8 months to a year to get your antibodies from in the hundreds or in the thousands down to 0, because your body is primed and ready, looking for an attack. Your thyroid's still there. So if it were tuned into your thyroid and it's just like, this thing has to die, well, what's it waiting for, right? So I think that's very clear that it's not molecular mimicry, that it's more to do with some sort of toxin attacking your body, and then you eliminating that toxin, and or it attacking your body and your body attacking it and trying to defend you. I'm getting ready to publish a few case series, or write some case series to publish, but some are on multiple sclerosis, which is a very debilitating disease that some people probably know about, that is an autoimmune disease where the body attacks its nervous system, and it demyelinates the axons, and you get improper firing of your nerves, and very seriously damaged, and people can become crippled, they die, they have a horrible time while they're doing it, and it's not a great quality of life as they're going and slowly degrading. And the treatments aren't great. It's basically just extremely suppress the immune system to such a degree that you can get very sick from very basic infections, and highly predisposes you for cancer, and it still progresses, and it still gets worse. And if you look at the studies, if you look at a certain treatment, even a ketogenic diet treatment, there are studies looking at ketogenic diets compared to just standard of care alone, and the outcome was, in 18 months, how many new lesions do you get? And the ketogenic diet group got less lesions, new lesions, than the standard of care, which is great. Say, hey, this could be beneficial in the treatment of MS. Notice it didn't say the lesions went away. They just had less new ones. That's the natural progression of MS. It progresses. It just gets worse. And I have around 10 now that have radiological confirmation of reduction in their lesions by up to 50% in a year. And that doesn't happen. I don't actually know of any published cases where that exists, and that happened with a strict red meat and water diet for most people for best results. Some people were a slight derivation of that, but the best results typically come from just red meat and water for those reasons that we mentioned. And Phil's work for the last decade has been with people with autoimmunity, showing them that they can actually heal themselves. And it's because they're not sick, they're just being poisoned. And if we reframe our thought process on this and realize that these diseases are not diseases, it's just that we're being poisoned and we don't realize it, then we might get somewhere. You know, in ancient Rome, they had lead poisoning. They had this for quite some time. They had no idea what was causing it. They just thought this was just getting older. And they didn't figure it out for quite some time. In fact, you look at literature going back to the 1600s, 1700s, there were periods there for hundreds of years that they actually had no idea the harmful effects of lead exposure. And so you see these exposures cause harm, and people just not really being able to figure out what it is, and they're doing bloodletting and cupping and leeches and all these other sorts of things, and it doesn't really work too well as you'd expect because it's not addressing the actual issue. And we're doing that now. You know, we're in an era of modern age cupping and bloodletting, which is all these immune suppressors and medications that can certainly help with symptom management to a degree, but can cause quite a significant burden of harm all on their own, and they do not address the underlying root cause, which is we're being poisoned. So that's just my 2 cents on autoimmunity. I thought that was sort of something that was important to sort of put out there and let people think about, that this isn't a disease like we thought it is. We're being poisoned, we're being attacked, and our body's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. There's nothing deranged about our immune system. Our immune system's doing what it's supposed to do, what it's always done. And there's no reason to think that has changed now. So the next one's on insulin. Insulin is one of the more important hormones in the body, and it affects well over 100 different mechanisms in the body, well over. If you go down, if you look this up, you look up the physiological effects of insulin, you'll see just this laundry list. I mean, literally, it's hundreds of different things, very important things. And so people think that the normal response is you eat carbohydrates go up, insulin goes up and drives energy into cells, and that's a normal process. Well, that's a normal process down here at physiological levels. But when you eat an abundance of carbohydrates and you get an abundance of insulin, now that insulin is elevated and is affecting everything at that elevated, unbalanced level, and you get very serious harm. You shut down things that shouldn't be shut down, you tell things to grow that shouldn't grow, and you get very serious diseases. Why the hell would our body do that? Well, I'll get to that, but we'll talk about insulin for a bit first. So, it's all to do with blood sugar, and blood sugar is actually quite harmful to us. It's what kills diabetics, and we'll sort of go into a bit of specifics there. But some of the things that insulin does, it can disrupt the entire metabolism. It blocks the effects of autophagy, mitogenesis, mitochondrial function. A lot of people will fast to try to get these benefits. Say like every 3 months you should fast for 5 days, and this will clear up some of the old precancerous cells and regenerate your mitochondria and make you healthier for all these different reasons. It's not because you're fasting, it's not because you're starving yourself, it's because your insulin is low. Because all of those effects happen when insulin is down at a normal level. And then when insulin raises up, it blocks those. So it will stop autophagy. It will not allow your body to break down these old precancerous cells and replace and swap out the mitochondria. Mitophagy is where your body does this on an organelle level. So your organelles are the organs of the cell. They're little structures, membranous structures inside the cell. And mitochondria produces energy, but it also does so much more than that. It actually moves around your cell, turns things on, turns things off in a very specific coordinated fashion to run the cell as if it were like a sailing vessel or some sort of ship with sailors going up and down the rigging, pulling ropes around the mast, things like that. It's very, very important, these mitochondria. And as they break down, as they get damaged, you get cellular dysfunction and physiological distress and metabolic disease. Autophagy, mitophagy, prevents that. So this is a normal housekeeping method that your body has to try to maintain and rebuild and repair your body. Sorry. And so when your insulin is up, you can't do that. It blocks your body's ability to replace the mitochondria or to make more mitochondria. That's called mitogenesis. And so just getting your insulin down, whether by fasting or just by not eating carbohydrates and keeping your insulin down, you will go through this process. And so you'll get more mitochondria, they'll be more effective, they'll be newer and less broken down. You'll break up the old ones, recycle them into new ones, and you'll make more of them. So you have more mitochondria and they're working better, and you have more healthy cells. And all that comes from having low insulin. High insulin will stop that. And so people get very sick because of that, as you would expect. There are a lot of diseases that are directly attributed to elevated insulin levels, like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's the leading cause of infertility in women worldwide. And that is caused from high insulin. Insulin blocks the conversion. So women make testosterone first, and that testosterone is converted into estrogen in the ovaries. And so insulin blocks that conversion. So you'll have lower levels of estrogen and higher levels of testosterone, and you'll get PCOS. And in fertility clinics, the way they treat this is just by giving them metformin, diabetes medication, right? So now PCOS is being called type 4 diabetes, because it's just diabetes, insulin resistance, and insulin damage of the ovaries. So very simple. You can take medications, I tell my patients coming in who have a new diagnosis of diabetes, that's like, well, we can give you these medications, you'll be on them for the rest of your life, we'll be steadily increasing the dose, you'll be adding more as we go, eventually you'll need to be on insulin, and you'll get complications of diabetes, like potentially loss of sight, your toes can rot off, you get amputations, your kidneys will fail, all these other you get atherosclerosis, type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's, type 4 diabetes, PCOS, and you'll continue to get these complications of diabetes until you die on average 10 to 15 years early, or you can stop eating carbs. Right? So I have not had anybody take the metformin so far. I mean, loading the deck, right? So, but it's true. I mean, that's what happens. That's the natural progression of diabetes. It's a very serious progressive disease that is quite harmful and costly as well. Fibroids are directly linked to insulin. Insulin is an anabolic steroid, meaning that it causes things to grow, but it doesn't just make you big and strong like other anabolics will. It causes certain things to grow, like fibroids, or skin tags, or your prostate, or colon polyps, or the muscular layer in your arteries, making them thicker and thicker so they can't release and lower your blood pressure. So you get high blood pressure. So all these sorts of diseases that we face all the time, it all just comes from insulin, or a lot of it comes from insulin, just being elevated. Leptin is a satiety hormone, but it's so much more than that. It's a keystone hormone that works at the level of your hypothalamus and can affect the regulation of other hormones coming out of your HPA axis, your hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis. And it is also our satiety hormone, so it is what can help us regulate our consumption of food, and you block that, and you don't necessarily know when to stop. A koala knows when to stop. Why the hell do they know? They don't even have a calculator. They can't figure out their macros, right? Something inside them tells them. All animals have something inside them that tells them when to stop eating. And the way you can tell if an animal is eating what it's supposed to eat is it doesn't have to think about it. It doesn't have to regulate in any way. It just eats. And good things happen when they do that. When bad things happen and they don't know when to stop, that's when you know they're eating something that they shouldn't. Ben and I were talking about this, and he found this passage from a paper in the 1930s where they're talking about fattening up hogs for slaughter and getting their lard up, because that was the major staple of why you raise hogs, is fattening them up for lard. This is very important that we have fat. It's actually, we're sort of fativores, and you sort of really need a lot of fat. And when the megafauna died out, we had to figure out other ways to get that fat, like fattening up pigs and getting the lard, or getting dairy and taking the milk fat from that dairy, making butter, things like that. So he found this paper that really talked about the best way to fatten up a pig is to feed it a combination of grains and skim milk. Skim milk was a byproduct, was a throwaway product of the cream and butter industry. No one wanted it. People wanted the fat. And so they found that this made the pigs overeat. That was the main thing. So the carbohydrates raising insulin, blocking leptin, lowering the blood sugar, you get reactive hypoglycemia, you feel tired, feel, want to go eat again. Insulin's up, that means you're storing fat, because insulin is the fat storage hormone. Type 1 diabetics don't make insulin. They could eat 50,000 calories a day. They cannot put on fat. They'll just waste away until they die, unless they're on a ketogenic diet, by the way. 140 years, the treatment for diabetes was a ketogenic diet. And then we developed insulin, and we just said, forget it, we'll just replace insulin. And there's actually an eating disorder called diabulimia, where type 1 diabetics will just stop taking insulin for a few days and just drop 20 pounds and just get in that swimsuit body sort of look. It's horribly bad for them, but it works. And that's why it doesn't matter what they eat, because they're not taking their insulin, they can't store fat, they're just losing a bunch of fat because their body's running on it. Contrast that with an insulinoma, which is a tumor that secretes insulin, and you get people that it doesn't matter what they eat, they get enormously obese. And because every single ounce of food that goes into them, that gets just stored into fat immediately, and they're horribly tired and they have no energy, because all their energy is immediately being shoved into their fat stores. And so that's what insulin does. It makes things grow, like your fat, right? And so we do that to pigs. And we also give them skim milk, which has more of this carbohydrates, which can raise your insulin, but it also has casomorphines, which tell the baby mammal they should eat more, eat more, eat more, eat more. And you have those pictures of little baby pigs. They're voraciously going after the milk, because that's what's going to make them big and strong, because the smaller, the weaker babies, they're very vulnerable, and they're going to probably die out like the runts of the litter for pigs. But babies are the large majority of what gets eaten out there, right? So they're vulnerable. So nature needs them to grow quickly. And so that's where casomorphines come in, and they will grow quick, but it tells them to eat and eat and eat. But it tells us to do the same thing. It also tells pigs. So what are grains and skim milk? It's just breakfast cereal, right? And we have been using this to fatten up pigs for slaughter for however long, centuries. And we think for some reason that the opposite is going to be true with us. That this is, that's like diet food. Special K, it'll make you slim, right? And no, it's not. It's doing the exact same thing. And now we're adding sugar to that. Everything's sugar cereals now. I mean, sugar cereals were not allowed in my house when I was a kid. Now it's like the only options almost. Not that I've eaten cereal in decades, but it's something that's being foisted on people as this very healthy food that it is going to help keep us slim, trim, and healthy. And it's not. It's absolutely not. It's not designed to. We have all these different ways of feeding animals that causes the same illnesses and physical manifestations of illness that we see, like fat. We're getting overweight because we're eating the same things that we feed to livestock to make them fat. And we're getting intramuscular fat. It's called myosteatosis. You see this on MRI. I see it all the time on my spinal patients. They'll have horrible back pain and all these degenerative spines. You will almost always see the paraspinal muscles and the iliopsoas, which is sort of originates from the spine, goes down through the abdomen, down to the pelvis. Not through the abdomen, down through the pelvis and the retroperitoneum, but it is typically infiltrated with fat. It's called myosteatosis, and this is a very clear sign of metabolic disease and also poor outcomes as far as pain is concerned with spinal surgery. People that have a lot of myosteatosis, they typically have worse outcomes for spinal surgery and back pain. That's marbling. How do we get that in cows? We feed them a bunch of grains. We feed them candy. We feed them alcohol, like the Kobe beef, things like that. I went to a restaurant, and they said that they had this special Wagyu steak that was like 100 days candy fed. Like just straight up candy. So people may have come across this. There was a news article once where this truck sort of fell over and all these Skittles came flying out. And I'm like, what the hell is that? They were all the off-make Skittles that had like a blemish or a defect or something like that. And they couldn't sell them in the packet for some reason. And they filter all them out and they give them to cows. They sell them to cattle yards to fatten up these pigs or these cows because it makes them fat and it makes them put on fat inside their muscles as well as on the outside of their muscles, myosteatosis. And we're confused as to why we have myosteatosis, right? Fatty liver disease. It only used to be seen in alcoholics, right? Now kids are getting it, and kids in the 90s were getting it. And so they started saying, oh, well, it probably was always happening, and we just didn't notice it, right? But that's always the excuse. You can say that once. But decade after decade, this has gotten worse and worse and worse. After we've been paying attention. After we said, let's pay attention now. We're paying attention now. So the clock starts in the 1990s and getting to 2000s and the 2010s and the 2020s. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. Okay, so now what's happening? Well, how do we make foie gras? Does anyone know what that is? Yeah, so how do we do that? Yeah, they give them grains. Yeah, just tons of it, right? We force feed ourselves grains, right? And the same thing's going to happen. Foie gras means fatty liver. So how do you make fatty liver in an animal? You give them grains. How do you make fatty liver in a human? Oh, it's too complicated. We'll never know. You know? Yeah, fructose too. Yeah, fructose is well, that was the thing. Fatty liver disease used to be only seen in middle-aged alcoholics, because alcohol, I don't have the formula up here, but the biochemistry is that it breaks down into multiple different components. One is a fatty droplet, and that fatty droplet starts accumulating in the fat in the liver, and you get this fatty liver. And fructose is the same thing. It's broken down to the same byproducts as alcohol, and it gets that same fatty droplet. I was actually taught that in medical school, funny enough. And so I was taught that it's like, wow, yeah, you just don't want to eat fructose because it's a very fatty sugar, right? And it's still back to fat, right? And so that's the thing, yeah. So you get fatty liver from that as well, but you can certainly get it from grains. You can certainly get it from an overabundance of carbohydrates and high insulin, right? So growth hormone is a hormone that helps build and repair our tissue and helps sort of keep us young. As that lowers as we get older, that can accelerate the aging process. It's not the only thing, but it is something that can help accelerate the aging process, which is why anti-aging clinics will often put people on growth hormone, which is why Sylvester Stallone got caught with a briefcase of growth hormone trying to bring it back in the country about 15 years ago. And he was just like, you guys are crazy. This is like the best stuff ever. This should be sold directly in pharmacies. It's obviously something that can be thoroughly abused and cause very serious harm, so I would not go that far. But it is something that is very good to have at healthful levels. Insulin blocks the action of growth hormone. And so you can actually get premature aging just on that. It lowers testosterone in men, and like I said before, it lowers estrogen in women. And we're seeing younger and younger women go through premenopause, early menopause, etc. I have women in their 50s that go onto a ketogenic carnivore diet, reverse their insulin resistance, and they start getting their periods again, which doesn't always make them happy. but it is a clear sign that they're healing and their body's getting better and they're aging backwards, right? There's no clearer sign than that. They were infertile, they went through menopause, they were in later stages of their life, and now they're not. What else is that? They're aging backwards, literally, and hormonally. I had a lady, she was 38 years old. I just saw her a couple weeks ago, and she was a bit overweight, so a lot of metabolic issues, insulin resistance, very low growth hormone. We check a surrogate called IGF-1, it's more stable, and so her IGF-1 was basically that of a typical 70-year-old woman, and she was unwell in a lot of other ways. She was going through, she was basically sort of in perimenopause. For the Australian numbers, she was just above the cutoff of what was detectable. They couldn't detect below 85. Below 85 is just like you're menopause or postmenopause. Her estrogen was 88, so she was very close to that. And she had all the different symptoms that you would associate with early menopause. And put her onto a ketogenic carnivore diet, and her periods stabilized, normalized, returned. Her estrogen went from 88 to 650. Her LH and FSH, which are hormones from your pituitary that tell your ovaries to do their job, or your testes to do their job in men, that normalized as well. It was quite elevated because her ovaries were struggling to make estrogen. No, they weren't. And her growth hormone tripled. It went from being that of the typical 70-year-old woman now, which is typically an unwell 70-year-old woman, to a healthy 25-year-old woman. So again, she's aging backwards just by getting this stuff out of her body, and getting her insulin down is a major part of that. So like I said, the benefits from fasting, fasting has been used as a medical intervention since 500 BC. And so this actually is something that we've seen is extremely beneficial. And I would argue that the majority of those benefits come from just the insulin being low, not just you starving yourself. Maybe there's something more from starving yourself, but the vast majority of these things, if you go through all the benefits of fasting, a lot of it comes down to like autophagy, insulin resistance, and things like that. That's all insulin. That's all just getting rid of carbohydrates, right? So if you go through that list, you even go on Wikipedia, if you scroll all the way down, or halfway down, there's ones on physiological functions. And there's just this laundry list, and you can look it up in other places as well, but Wikipedia is very accessible to a lot of people. You'll see all the different things that it affects. And you start thinking about, okay, well, what are the benefits of fasting? You'll see them on that list. So it really comes down to insulin. It also blocks fat for energy in all of us, but in particular in athletes who may have a higher energy demand. When you are eating carbohydrates, you have to rely on your blood sugar and your glycogen. For a 65 kilo individual, they'll have about 2,300 calories stored in glycogen in their muscles and their liver. Okay, so that's a decent amount. You make it about a day of normal activity, as per, normal sort of standards. High intensity exercise, you're probably gonna run out of that energy. And you have to keep taking down sugar gels and packets and things like that. Except when I was a kid, you were told not to do that. You were told to keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. Eventually you break through the wall and you get your second wind, you keep going, and then you can just go forever. And why is that? Because you tapped into your fat stores at that point. So being in ketosis and being able to run on your fat stores, and you can generate your blood sugar and glycogen and ketones. And then you tap into your fat energy. Your fat is your actual stored energy for any use that you may have. And you can store that same 65 kilo individual, even at 6% body fat, so a very lean person, is still gonna have in just that 6% body fat over 35,000 calories of energy. So it's a remarkable difference, about 15 times the amount of energy for a 6% body fat individual at 65 kilos. And so most of us are not in that category, right? So we have even more energy available to us. So it's a big advantage. Richard went into this as well, but you use far more NAD plus to burn glucose as you do ketones. So NAD plus is actually a very important molecule, and as we age, we get less and less and less of this, and our biochemical processes get more and more damaged, deranged, and we age. And our brains age, and our organs age, and things like that. You're in ketosis, you're gonna have more NAD plus. And you'll likely make more of it as well, and you won't use quite so much of it either. You won't run out of it as readily. You'll have it available for other processes as well. So why the hell would your body do that? Why would you let your insulin get deranged when it causes all of those problems? Well, the reason is because blood sugar is even worse. You have about 4 grams of glucose in your circulation right now for the average person. That is enough glucose to fuel every single biochemical process and physiological process of your body and your brain. 4 grams, and you'll regenerate this. Even 1 extra gram, up to 5 grams, is a toxic dose to your body, and your body responds to it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it by raising your insulin, which as we know is not something that your body's going to do lightly. It's very important to keep that at normal levels, and yet it is so important for your body to keep your blood sugar under 4 grams that it's willing to sacrifice all those other things, because that 1 extra gram can cause very serious harm. Glucose is necessary for many processes in your body, but it's not as necessary as people think. Well, we need it for our brain. Actually, only 1/3 of your brain requires glucose. 2/3 of your brain optimally run on ketones. When you have enough ketones and enough glucose, your brain will only run on the ketones, or those 2/3 of it, including your neocortex, the part that you do your thinking with, will only run on ketones, even if there's an abundance of glucose. It's only when the ketone levels start to degrade that the gaps are filled in with glucose. But if you have any ketones at any time, those parts of your brain will be running on all those ketones and then filling in the gaps with glucose. Glucose damages other molecules and tissues by something called glycation, which is a non-enzymatic fusion of those carbohydrate molecules and these other molecules, so they basically stick to them and they bind to them and they damage them. We measure this in things like HbA1c. That's a marker of how much glycation has happened between glucose and your hemoglobin. We have HbA1c is for glucose, HbA1b is for fructose. So all the different carbohydrate molecules will do this to different degrees, and fructose actually does this worse than glucose. And your body really works hard to keep fructose out of your system, which is why it goes straight to the liver, and your liver just breaks it down right then. Unfortunately, diabetics can convert as much as 30% of their glucose into fructose, And so this could compound the problem. It's like that Pareto principle, where people at the end tend to be even further. So as you get out there and get more glycation and more oxidative stress and more glucose damaging your body, more fructose damaging your body, it actually can perpetuate that and make it even worse by converting glucose into fructose. So just that 1 extra gram over time, binding to all of the different proteins and molecules and cells in your body and damaging them, overwhelms your system eventually, and you start getting very serious tissue damage and destruction and organ damage with diabetes. Diabetes is a disease of end organ damage, meaning that you get damage to things like your kidneys or your eyes or your brain, all these other sorts of things. So just that 1 extra gram of glucose is what makes diabetics' toes rot off, makes their legs need to get amputated, then their kidneys fail, they go on dialysis. The leading cause of kidney dysfunction and chronic kidney disease is diabetes, and they have to go on dialysis, and they get kidney transplants, and they develop atherosclerosis and heart disease, cardiovascular disease. Alzheimer's is called type 3 diabetes, PCOS is type 4 diabetes. You get hormonal dysfunction, you get testicular dysfunction, you get ovarian dysfunction. You go blind, you get diabetic retinopathy, you lose your vision, and eventually you just give up because life is just pretty horrible at that point. And you're on more and more and more medications to try to keep your blood sugar low because it's the blood sugar that's destroying your body. So just stop eating sugar, just stop eating carbs. It just pulls the rug out from under diabetes, it goes away. And we've seen this in large-scale human trials showing experimentally that you can go through therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, put people on a clean, high-fat, meat-based diet. Diabetes goes away. And I have countless patients that with diabetes. I'm sure every physician in this room has had the same experience. It's so powerful, in fact, that in Australia, thankfully, there's a guy named Dr. James Mukey, who's a friend of mine, and he's an ophthalmologist, and he had a charitable organization in ophthalmology and vision. And he actually, because of his charitable work, he was awarded, named Australian of the Year in 2020. And because of that position and that credit that was given to him, they asked him, say, hey, do you want to be on the board to decide the next round of recommendations for diabetes? They just wanted a big name attached to it. Say, oh, look at this, we got this top doctor on there. Little did they know that he knew about this research. And so he fought tooth and nail to get carbohydrate restriction and ketogenic diets on the national schedule to treat diabetes. And he met fierce opposition. There were other people that absolutely fought tooth and nail to keep this off. And one in particular, and I just have a sneaking suspicion, they probably was on some sort of board or payroll of some sort of sugar, cereal, or drug company. But either way, he was able to convince everybody else. And he's able to get it on. So now it's been in the national schedule to treat diabetes for the last few years. And so that protects doctors like myself and Dr. Sanjeev, who are sort of flying without a net. But now we can. This is a ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diets are used for diabetes. This is mainstream medicine now, right? And that's the argument that we can make, and I've had to make, because people have said, this guy's putting forward horrible, evil information out on the internet, and he's hurting people with this carnivore diet. And I just point out, hey, look, carnivore diet's a ketogenic diet. That's in the national schedule for treating diabetes. This is mainstream medicine now. And they agreed. The medical board agreed, which is great. And so now, that has been so successful. The diabetes being treated with ketogenic diets has been so successful in the last few years. It's now been upgraded to best practice status. So now a ketogenic diet is considered best practice for treating diabetes. So that's pretty amazing. And but that just all again comes back to glucose, sugar. Just that 1 extra gram is what damages all these things. So hardening of the arteries, heart attacks, kidney disease, dialysis, strokes, retinopathy, fatigue, obviously, weakened immune system, erectile dysfunction, nerve damage, neuropathy, poor blood flow, etc., slow wound healing as well, and again, amputations. So all of that is because of 1 extra gram of glucose. And so it is so important for your body to keep your blood sugar below 4 grams that is willing to completely upend your entire metabolism just to do that. And eventually that overwhelms your system and your blood sugar starts coming up anyway, and you get all those complications of diabetes. And then you die, generally 10 to 15 years early, and you've suffered for decades before that. And so that is why your body's willing to slam up your insulin and cause all those other problems. And it is such a simple solution. You know, we want less than 4 grams of glucose in our body, and yet we're eating 200, 300, 400 grams of carbs and sugar a day, right? And your body's just reeling because it's trying to keep it below 4 grams. And eventually your body wears out. It just can't do that anymore, and that's when you get diabetes, and that's when you get the complications thereof, and that's when you die. And so this is something that's so easy. And even if you don't want to go full carnivore, but again, it points you in that direction. If animals are eating what they're supposed to eat, they shouldn't have these problems, right? So clearly carbohydrates are not right for us as an animal species. They're not right for pigs either. They're not right for cows either, right? And we already learned cows and other animals that eat fibrous plants, they don't break down that fiber into its constituent glucose molecules. The bacteria eat the fiber. No vertebrate animal can make cellulase, which breaks down cellulose. So it's the bacteria and the protozoa, the microorganisms that eat the cellulose, and as a byproduct excrete saturated fats. And then those protozoa and bacteria die off, and they're absorbed as protein and other nutrients. Okay, so the cow, the gorilla, they're actually fermenting this food. They're actually growing and cultivating the bacteria, because that's their food source. They just eat the vegetation because that's what feeds their little colonies in their gut. They don't want the carbohydrates. It makes them sick. Also makes us sick too. And so that's just a depiction. That's something that I tell my patients to thoroughly scare the hell out of them to never eat carbs again. So hopefully that had the same effect here. Okay, so people may know of my talk called "Plants Are Trying to Kill You," and there's a story behind that. But should we really be trying to kill plants? You know, the argument for being vegetarian is that plants are not sentient. They can't think. They don't feel. They don't have pain sensations, things like that. They don't care. It's just like a rock. It doesn't matter. And so, but an animal does have feelings, and it's slavery, and it's cruel, and it's all these other sorts of things, and it can be. And I think that us as custodians of livestock and other animals have a serious duty and responsibility to treat them as well as possible, and give them as good a life as possible and as clean a death as possible. And that's very important, and we need to vote with our dollar, and vote with our pocketbook, and not support practices that abuse animals. I think that's very, very important. But the default is then to eat a whole bunch of plants because, you know, plants are useless. Well, first of all, they're not proper at nutrition. You cannot get proper nutrition from plants. And you get a lot of the bad with the good. You get a lot of toxins. We heard from Richard earlier today about all the different sorts of toxins in these so-called superfoods and how actually harmful they are. And that's because they're trying to not die. They're trying to survive just like every other form of life. And while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they have different means of defense. And a lot of that's chemical. So a lot of that's harmful. But why don't they want to die? I thought they couldn't think. I thought they didn't have emotions. I thought they didn't have any sort of sense. Well, plants may be closer to sentient than you think. People thought these things are just inert, lumps of vegetation. But there was a book that came out in the 70s called The Secret Life of Plants that really sort of put that into question. And now we are learning much more about them. We actually know that they can actually sense light. They can see individuals or animals close to them. They can recognize colors. And so while they don't have eyes necessarily, they have the same proteins photoreceptive proteins that we have in our retinas that can see things. So they don't have eyes, they are eyes, right? And they have nervous systems that feel and respond to pain just like we do. We send certain chemical signals down our nerve cells to say, hey, we're being damaged, and we feel that as pain. Ow, that hurts. Plants do the same thing, they send the same chemical. So there's similarities here. They communicate too. We've seen that plants like tomatoes can interact with each other. They can send chemical signals to each other. They send vibrations to each other. Scientists have figured out that there's different vibrations and frequencies that plants emit, and say like when they're dry, when they need certain nutrients, and they need more water, when they're being attacked, other sorts of things like that. When they're being attacked, they can send out chemical signals, and that is sent out to the other plants around them, and they send specific chemical signals for a specific attack, like a specific bug, like an aphid. And they send out the aphid signal, they can send out vibrations too, also chemical signals. And then they start producing more toxins towards aphids. And then they send that chemical signal out, and the plants around them start making more toxins towards aphids. Then all of a sudden, a little green caterpillar comes around, and they send off the chemical for little green caterpillars. And they start making the toxins for little green caterpillars, and all the other plants around them do too. So they're actually communicating quite effectively. Like I said, they have ultrasonic sort of sounds that they emit. Certain animals can hear that. We can't, but we have special instruments that can. And we're starting to figure out what these mean, which is very interesting. We're starting to figure out the language of plants, which means that they have a language. So that means that they're not just dumb lumps of tissue, right? That there's something more there that we just don't understand because it's a different form of life. And different sorts of smells. This can drive away predators, but can also warn other plants about predators. And some people have actually argued that plants may be more sentient than humans, just in a different way we just don't know about. But just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not there, and doesn't mean that we can just take that for granted. Well, that was the other thing. Very interesting. Some people have said that plants display signs of individuality and actual personalities, which I think would probably make a lot of vegans go into full denial mode. They communicate through their roots network as well. This is probably one of the more interesting discoveries that's been figured out. They can communicate via their roots. They can pass resources in between different plants, but it's not just the same breed of tree, like a pine tree or an alder or something like that. They can communicate with other species of plant and tree as well. There's certain sort of suggestions on different chemical signals, but one of the more interesting ones are these fungal networks. And there's two different fungal networks, and if you're a plant or a tree that can work with one fungal network, you can communicate with every other plant in that fungal network. But even though you're right next to another plant that communicates on the other fungal network that we know about, you can't talk to them. So they have these two different societies, if you will, just living right past each other and passing like ships in the night. It's very interesting. They're in forests. They've found that they have sentinel trees. They're sort of like the leader of the forest. And they actually communicate and coordinate all the different sort of business of the forest through this fungal root system. And they can actually coordinate and figure out what plants in what areas are struggling and which ones have abundance of resources. So if you have miles away, have a grove over here that's just not getting enough water and they're just a bit dry, and these guys over here are flush, they can actually funnel and siphon water through their root system from tree to tree to tree to tree and get it to the ones that need it, or different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and things like that that they need. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, this is a functioning society, if you want to think about it that way. We just don't understand it yet. So they also feel pain. This is something that there are more and more studies coming out on, that they actually feel pain. When you damage them and hurt them and disrupt them, they send the same signals and respond in the same way as an animal would to pain. And again, it's the same chemical signals as well. So again, we sort of talked about the different plants, how they communicate when they're in danger, and they send off distress signals, etc. They release glutamate, just like we do when we're damaged. We release this glutamate signal of our pain receptors, and it hits our brain and goes like, ooh, something's biting my finger. And we look down going, ooh, what's going on here? So you can respond. The same thing happens when a plant is damaged. And it sends a signal down, and then a response comes. It says, okay, we're being damaged here, and we're going to send a response here. And so that's quite sophisticated. And we shouldn't just, we shouldn't overlook that. This is a sort of an interesting video that I wanted to play for you guys. Do we have sound?
Good. Turned itself off. Yes, it has.
And many more variable.
Okay. I'll try and start that over again.
Over the past 2 decades, there's been a revolution in vegetal biology. Science now shows that plants appear to be sentient beings. They perceive light, smell, touch, water, and many more variables than we do. They can learn, remember, and communicate. They exhibit the traits that we associate with personhood. Experimental science has confirmed that plants can see when you're standing next to them and the color of your shirt. They don't have eyes, but they have the same photoreceptor proteins all over their bodies that humans have at the back of the retina. Plants don't have brains, but they translate information into electrical chemical signals in their cells identical to the ones used by our own neurons. A plant may not have a brain, but it acts like a brain, says Narby. The word neuron comes from the Greek for vegetal fiber. Neurons actually look like the cut of the inside of a plant. Research over the past 30 years has illuminated a profound intelligence throughout nature. Dolphins and many other animals recognize themselves in a mirror, long a scientific measure of intelligence. Pigeons have better memory for paintings than do college students. Sheep have better memory of human faces than humans have. Bees that are invertebrates with brains the size of a grain of sugar can consistently process abstract concepts in tests that require perceiving sameness and difference. It's true. But you gotta give it up for slime molds.
Okay, so, sorry, so that sort of just keeps going on. But the main part with that was the plants, right? So these things are not just inert, lumps of tissue that don't have anything else going for them. So when someone makes the ethical argument that you're causing hurt, harm, you're causing all these sort of things, you can just stop that right there, because unfortunately we are heterotrophs, and actually that actually does make me sad, in a sense, because it's not nice that we have to kill something for us to live, but we do, and that's a reality. And as Marcus Aurelius said in his Meditations, if you're scared or upset by something that's just natural, it's just part of nature, it really shows that you're a child, because it is what it is, and it sucks that it is, but it is. And so we need to be realistic about this, but we do it in the right ways, right? We don't hurt and torture the animals. Just be, oh well, we have to eat it anyway, we might as well make it miserable. No. We don't have to do that. We don't have to, eat something alive from its guts first, like a hyena does, and torture it and flip it around like throw seals around in the air and play, catch with them like orcas do. We don't need to do that, right? We can respect their life as much as we respect others, but respecting ours as well, and our children's, and understanding that this actually is the best way, and really the only way, to get adequate, proper, and optimal nutrition for ourselves and our children, and the only way to get optimal development, hormonally, physiologically, from stature point of view, and neurologically as well. Our brains are smaller now than they were before the agricultural revolution. They're 11% smaller now for men than they were before the agricultural revolution. They're 17% smaller for women. But that didn't take thousands of years. It didn't take 10,000 years for that to happen. That happened overnight in the fossil record. There's a distinct line in the fossil record, pre and post agriculture, where you see this massive change in the cranial capacity of humans, and the height, and the jaw size, and the crooked teeth, and crowding, and infectious disease like tuberculosis up and down the spinal column. All of those things happen directly after agriculture, and we're seeing populations alive right now, transitioning right now, exhibiting those exact same differences, like the Native Americans, the Great Plains, the Native Australians, the Maasai. I have a patient of mine, her best friend is from the Maasai tribe. She's a first generation lady to leave. She got a nursing degree. She's living in Sydney. She's just eating normal thing. She's in her 30s and she's got metastatic cancer and all these other metabolic diseases. They get far higher rates of cancer and other metabolic issues and chronic diseases than European populations and Asian populations and Middle Eastern populations, etc., who have been exposed to agriculture and these plant toxins for 10,000 years as opposed to 100 years or no years, because this poor young lady, her parents never ate plants. And so this was brand new for her. And so she had absolutely no time for her genetics to sort of adapt even slightly. So she got hit much harder. When I first moved to Australia, I was told day one that if I got an Aboriginal patient, I needed to just add 20 years to the age on their sticker, because they just age so much more quickly. They just get diseases so much more quickly than everybody else does, and we don't know why. I think that's why. Because they don't get this in the wild. Our anthropologists right now talk about how these pre-agricultural societies, the medical issues that they get are very specific. They're accidents, injuries, difficulty with childbirth, illnesses in childhood, infectious disease, lions, things like that. That's what they contend with. And then when they move to the cities or they go to a post-agricultural way of living, then they get very different health outcomes. And the majority of illnesses and issues that they have, and the majority of causes of death, are from so-called diseases of civilization, which we would just call getting older. So diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmunity. And these are not diseases. These are toxicities and malnutrition that come expressly from just eating the wrong thing. And it is so empowering to know that, because it is so simple. It's not always easy for people to do and change their whole way of thinking and their way of eating, but it is extremely straightforward. You just eat to our biological design, and your body will work to its biological design, and these diseases go away. And so people are suffering from these diseases, suffering from MS, they're wheelchair bound, they have diabetes, their foot's rotting off, and they have to get an amputation and go on dialysis, and there's no way out. All the best treatments in modern medicine have failed them, and they're just getting worse, which is why a lot of people burn out. A lot of doctors throw everything that they have, all of their care, love, and attention, and education, and intelligence, they throw at fighting these diseases, and they never win. They only get worse. They always progress. I had a professor of neurosurgery when I was a medical student who got irate at a resident who gave away his patient. Normally they're fighting to not have patients. Like, oh my God, you just admitted too many people. I was like, well, that's how many tumors there were. I mean, Jesus, what do you want me to do? But this person had trigeminal neuralgia, which is something that you can actually fix surgically. And this professor of neurosurgery was irate that he was that it was just given to somebody else, because he said he loved trigeminal neuralgia because it's something that he can actually fix. It's something he can actually cure. He said that 60% of his patients were going to be dead within 2 years, but this is something he can actually fix. That's a big deal. And so understanding that as patients, as doctors, that we don't have to be sick. We don't have to just go down that same path to illness and an early death and think that, yeah, this is as good as it's going to get. We're in a modern era with modern medicine. and we're living so much better than our ancestors. I can tell you right now we're not from a health perspective, not even close. But it is, once you understand that, it is so empowering because you have all that illness, all that disease, and there's no way out, but now all of a sudden there is. So it's not a restricted diet. Oh my gosh, I'm so restricted, I can't eat anything else. I don't want to eat anything else, you know? I mean, it's like, if you don't do meth, you're like, oh, you're so restricted, you don't do meth. I don't want to do meth, all right? Like, why the hell would I? You know, oh, you mean like on your birthday, you don't just go and have a cake? On your birthday, you go and people are doing meth, you just snort up a bunch of lines and inject. Wow, why would I? Why would I? I don't want that stuff in my body. It's not restrictive at all. It doesn't take any willpower to do exactly what I want. I never want to eat any of that garbage because it is garbage. And it is so empowering to be able to get your health back without any help from anybody else. You don't have to rely on medication. You don't have to rely on procedures. You don't need a special supplement or something you buy online. I mean, how huge is that industry where people, oh, get this and get that and this little thing and you'll soak your toes and you'll copper sulfate and all this sort of nonsense because people are so desperate to not be sick anymore. And they don't have to be. And that's really empowering once you understand that, once you really understand that, which is why I try to educate my patients on why eating this way is of benefit. Not just how to do it, but why to do it. Because if they understand why to do it, it's a lot easier to stay on it. I know why. And there's not a chance in hell I'm ever going to go away from this. People, oh, do you cheat or whatever? I think I remember Olivia, when, like years ago, when you first met Elle, you went to her, it's like, is he really that strict? Does he like cheat sometimes? And she's like, no, he really doesn't, you know, because, you know, people think that it's like, it's just a gimmick. It's not. This is optimal health. This is the way we're designed to eat. This is the way we're designed to live. This is the way our bodies are designed. I have no interest in any of that stuff. I enjoy drinking. I haven't had a drink in 2 years. Why? Because I like being healthy more. I like how my body feels, my brain feels, way more than I like being drunk or anything like that. Certainly more than I like asparagus. You know, that's just a no-brainer. You know, so you know, for me, it's you know, it is very straightforward. I was gonna go into, just because some people, you know, don't. I mean, like I said, some people have been dragged into this, and they think like these guys are just nuts. So I was going to do my talk on plants are trying to kill you, but I don't know if we have time for that. So I don't know. Yes. Yes? Okay. All right. I'll try to do the truncated version and not take too long. And I'll end it with a video as well, which is actually, it's not just me saying this. This is Botany 101. These are hard facts. You can look up everything I'm saying here in any book on botany, any textbook on botany. You will see that principle that plants are toxic and they don't want to be eaten, and they make defensive chemicals towards that. And I'll play a video at the end. It's only 6 minutes long. A professor of botany at Cambridge University, who's head of their botanical gardens, Dr. John Parker, who talks more about this as well. So it's not just me. I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. Oh, and that was the other thing here. This is a famous quote. Vegetarians are people who cannot hear tomatoes screaming. Right? But maybe it's just because we can't hear them screaming doesn't mean they aren't screaming. And that's something to remember as well. Okay, so plants are trying to kill you. That's something that I'll explain where that origin is for people that don't know. But the entire idea behind this is that plants don't want to be eaten. They make toxins in order to defend themselves. Like we just pointed out, there is a sentience to them, at least to a degree. Not one that we necessarily understand, not one that's like ours necessarily, but it does exist. And they have just as much right to be here as we do, and they're going to fight for that. And like Ben said, everything living right now is descended from the winners and the fighters. Everything here that has gone through the gauntlet of evolution is extremely successful and descended from extremely successful individuals as well. So, like I said, this is Botany 101. I learned in 7th grade that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic so less and less animals can eat them so they can survive and thrive. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so that they can survive, so they can eat that plant and thrive. But if they eat any other plants, they get very, very sick or they can even die. And we see this in a lot of aspects, especially in livestock medicine, when an animal gets in a pen or a pasture and they run out of food, like we saw, like all those deer and elk and etc. that were in that very large area in the, what was it, the Netherlands? And they all died out because they ran out of resources, right? So they probably started eating plants they normally wouldn't either, and that would have caused problems too and killed them. So they have thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of defensive chemicals that they use to either directly be toxic, directly harm you, indirectly screw with your biology, physiology, hormonal structures, and can bind to nutrients, do all these other sorts of things. So you have these lectins, cyanide. It's about nearly 3,000 plants that we know of that have these cyanogenic glycosides that form hydrogen cyanide, which is toxic to all life on Earth. And it's sort of a kill switch. You have these two molecules, and then when they're crushed, when they're damaged, they release these chemicals and they form hydrogen cyanide as basically, if you're going to kill me, I'm going to kill you, right? And so that's what they do. And so sulforaphane is the same thing. It's a kill switch. When you bite into broccoli, that's when you release these chemicals that then bind to form sulforaphane. So the plant is not doing that to try to help cure you of cancer. It's trying to do it to kill whatever the hell is trying to eat it. Same with the cyanide. And the idea is, oh, well, this helps in cancer. Oh, great, let's just all take chemo then. I mean, some of the most toxic plants on Earth are the ones that we've derived some of our strongest chemotherapy agents, like the yew tree, which is extremely toxic in all of its parts except its little berries. And that's been a source of some of the strongest chemotherapy agents because it is toxic. So it kills cells, and it kills certain cells in our body, hopefully faster than it kills the rest of your body, right? And so that's a defense. It's not trying to do that to help you. There's other hormonal disruptors, nutrient blockers. They will bind to and block the absorption of vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, etc. They can also disrupt the absorption and block protease, lipase, other sorts of digestive enzymes, and stop you from breaking those down in the first place and not absorb them. And fiber is in that category as well. It can block out the absorption and breakdown of food. Photosensitivity, making you light sensitive. How many tan, bronzed vegans have you seen running around? Not many, right? And one reason is because they can get very photosensitive. There are a lot of chemicals that actually cause you to burn if you go out in the sun, or even burn if they get on your skin. You get chemical burns. We'll talk about that. And nightshades. Nightshades are a big one for that. They have tons of these lectins and are very, very toxic. So, like I said, plants and animals are an evolutionary arms race. Most plants will kill most animals, even 100% herbivores. Well, they're not really 100% herbivores. Even cows are known to eat like baby birds and little rabbits and things like that. Herbivores will opportunistically eat animals and get meat. But even ones that are classed as herbivores that are specially adapted to break down plants, most plants will still kill them. There are over 300,000 plants in the world. Koalas eat one, pandas eat one. Cows, horses, grazing animals, they eat grasses, but they eat specific grasses, and they eat other ones that can get sick or they die. The leaves that a gorilla eats are different from the leaves that a giraffe eats, those are different from the leaves that a deer eats, and so on. And if you mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die, right? So we are not outside of that. We are animals, just like every other animal from the kingdom Animalia. We did not come down here from space. We are of this earth, and those same physical, biological laws apply to us. And so if your species has not evolved to eat a specific plant, that plant is bad for you, and you need to be aware of that. So that's another good example there. So the cassowary bird is that middle guy there. It's like a freaking dinosaur. They're like that tall. They're freaky. But they're frugivores. They just eat fruit and berries. But they eat specific ones, other ones will kill them. But of the 150 fruits and berries that they eat, every single one will kill you. Every single one will kill every single animal except the cassowary bird. Because while the plant wants something to eat their fruit and pass along their seeds, they don't necessarily want everything to eat their fruit, to pass along their seeds. If those seeds don't go through the digestive tract of a cassowary bird, they won't germinate and turn into a new plant. And so those are the plant's babies. And so that's a big deal. And so if they get eaten by anything else besides a cassowary bird, the next generation of plants will not exist. And in fact, if a cassowary bird leaves an area, those plants will die out. And so those fruits have to be extremely beneficial and attractive to a cassowary bird and extremely toxic and detrimental to everything else trying to eat it, or else they die, they go extinct. And so things that didn't quite get that right are now extinct. 98% or 97% of animal species, for instance, are now extinct, right? So they're the ones that didn't quite make it for whatever reason. Plants, the majority of plants are now extinct as well. So this is we're only dealing with the battle-hardened winners in life now. And yeah, I mean, you go out in the forest, you go for a nature walk, and you just see random berries that you don't recognize. I hope everybody's mother here has told them, don't eat those things. And mine certainly did. And that's why, because, well, they're a berry, they're a fruit. Plant wants you to eat them. No, they don't. They typically want birds to eat them, but they may not want you to eat them. Some are better than others, just like some plants are better than others. And but it's not because they're better, it's because we have better defenses, right? Because koalas will eat eucalyptus, but they'll make us very sick. But spinach would make a koala very sick, right? So you have to, it depends on the individual. Food is extremely species specific. You can't just eat brazenly, except meat, because meat doesn't need to be toxic. And that's why 70% of animal species are carnivores, because they don't need to build up the bioengineering to deal with all these toxins. They just have to figure out how to kill another animal. So this is a study from Professor Bruce Ames. Well, it's a discussion of a study from Bruce Ames. Bruce Ames did a lot of work out of UC Berkeley in the 1980s, published in late 80s and 90s, talking about the natural toxins that exist in plants. And he found that 99.99% of the pesticides, insecticides, and toxins that were on the vegetables and plants that we eat are naturally occurring. The plants make them themselves. Because look at all these plant transplants here. I mean, do you see people spraying them with pesticides to keep the bugs off them? No, they make their own. We're not crop dusting jungles and forests and things like that. The plants do it themselves, right? And so we add a bit to that because there are certain insects that can go after certain crops, and so we want to protect that crop, and so we put a blanket toxin on there. And what happens then? The toxin gets into us, so it's just adding insult to injury with the toxicity levels and all the pesticides and fertilizers and all these other sorts of things. They destroy our waterways, they destroy our environment, they destroy the microbiome of the soil. Glyphosate is an antibiotic, and so we're basically taking broad spectrum antibiotics every time we eat any sort of plants with glyphosate on it, and all plants basically have glyphosate on it. They're finding glyphosate in the rainwater now in certain areas, and it also kills the microbiome in the soil, which completely destroys the soil health. It's very important to have the rich microbiome in the soil, and these chemicals that we're using and spraying on them, they actually kill them. But the plants themselves make the vast majority, so they make 10,000 times more toxic elements by weight than the pesticides we spray on them. And those are just the ones that he knew about back in the 1980s, right? When I was taking cancer biology in the University of Washington when I was in my undergraduate degree, that's why I stopped eating plants, because my professor was very clear about how toxic plants were and how carcinogenic they were. Because these toxins cause physiological damage, they damage your mitochondria, they damage other sorts of cellular processes in your body, and that can lead to cancer. And so he showed us that 24 years ago, that Brussels sprouts alone had 136 known carcinogens, and that mushrooms had over 100 known carcinogens, and that spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, tomatoes, all of these things had 60, 80, over 100 known carcinogens each, and they were quite abundant, as we saw here. And so that blew us away. We were very taken aback by that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how could that possibly be? We were looking around wildly, and I was like, this has to be a joke. But no one was laughing. And so we eventually settled down and realized that he wasn't joking. And I remember thinking in my head, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? Because we're just inundated with this nonsense since we're born. And at that moment, I felt like he read my mind, because he looked at us and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And I just decided right then, like, fine, screw plants. I'm not eating those anymore. I went straight to the grocery store. I was sort of shell-shocked. I'm like, what the hell do I eat? Everything's a plant. There's just plants everywhere. And I'm just wandering around aimlessly. I'm like, what the hell do you eat? I came across some eggs. I'm like, oh, okay, eggs. Eggs don't come from a plant. What about meat? Meat doesn't come from a plant. Fine. Eggs and meat. That's what I ate for years, and I never felt better in my entire life. I was playing high-level rugby at the university and in the premiership team in my town. And my performance went through the roof. I never felt better in my entire life until right now, when I'm back on it. And there was a gap there, because I did it for 5 years, and you're just inundated with, oh, you have to eat plants, you have to eat plants. I'm like, ugh, fine, I'll eat some stupid vegetables. But I was still mostly eating meat, and very quickly I did not feel the same. I did not feel as good. And I remember thinking to myself, I was playing professionally in England at the time, and I remember thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I not working out as much? Am I not pushing myself as hard? Or I was 25 at the time. I figured, okay, is that it? I'm over the hill. I'm just dying now. But at 25, I felt like a superhero. At 25 and a half, I did not. And I couldn't figure out what the hell that difference was. And I kept trying to get back to that for the next 13 years, and I couldn't do it until I was 38 years old. And I realized, like, no wait, humans just actually are carnivores as a species, and that's what I was doing. And that's why I felt so good. And I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me to get rid of these stupid things. And I dropped them, and at 38 years old, I felt like I was 22 again. And I lost a bunch of weight. I started trimming up, shedding fat, stacking on muscle. And I felt so good, I said, right, going back to play rugby. And I started playing professional rugby again. My team in Seattle had gone fully professional at that point. In the MLR, the Major League Rugby. That was the first season. And I was back out playing, and I was just right in there with it. Having not run or played a full season in 3 years, just being a carnivore for 2 weeks, I was just right in there with it, just step for step with everybody. Still overweight, still completely out of shape, hadn't run at all, but I felt amazing because of my diet and how my body was working. 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks of training, that's it. And now 4 weeks of being carnivore. And we did a modified bleep test, which is a fitness test that we did. And I came in top 5 out of 92 players, all diet. And my friends who are now the coaches and things like that on the team, they're like, wow, that's amazing. You know, you really kept together, really kept in shape. I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm not in shape. That is all diet. And I started telling people about it, and they started having very similar results as well. Not everybody was able to stick to it. But a massive, massive, massive difference. Just by dropping vegetables. I wasn't eating crap. I never ate junk food. I never had a sugar addiction or carb cravings or anything. I never ate that stuff. I was always extremely health conscious and nutritionally conscious. I just wanted perfect nutrition in my body. I did not want to put crap in my body. Never. And so all I did was drop vegetables. I dropped spinach, kale, and broccoli. And started eating a lot more fatty meat. That's all I was eating. I was already ketogenic. It was just lean meat and greens. And I cut out the greens, started eating a lot more fatty meat. Massive difference, changed everything. Probably quintupled my caloric intake, and yet I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. Why the hell is that? Because we're physiologically destroying our body with these foods, and our hormones, and lectins, as I'll come to. Let's see. Oh. This is another interesting one. So the WHO actually knows about this. WHO is no fan of the carnivore diet, to say the least. They have a lot of things knocking meat and saying that it's carcinogenic, which is complete and utter garbage. And they've been roundly excoriated for doing that, because it was extremely dishonest the way that they came about that conclusion of meat and red meat being carcinogenic. And the University of Washington in Seattle actually showed, looking at over 800 studies on the subject, that you really could not say that meat caused cancer, colon cancer, or any other deleterious health effect at all. And but in the WHO, there actually are people that know how to do their job, and they have an entire webpage here that talks about natural toxins in foods. Natural toxins in the food that we eat. Food, not just random things. Food, right? And so it's all these different natural toxins. They talk about all the different sort of plants and fungus and algae and things like that can be toxic and have these different toxic chemicals. Not anywhere on that entire list is anything to do with meat. There isn't a single toxin in meat as identified by the WHO. So why are we saying that meat's toxic and plants are good when you have this entire webpage dedicated to all the toxins in the food that we eat? And it says there, right there, long-term health consequences include effects to the immune, reproductive, and nervous system, and also cancer. Adverse health effects can be acute poisoning, ranging from allergic reactions to severe stomach ache, diarrhea, and even death. This can be carcinogenic and mutagenic to both humans and livestock. This is not up for debate. These are facts. So, starting with lectins. Lectins are a broad range of plant toxins that there are lectins in meat as well, as it turns out, but they don't seem to cause any problems in humans. And so the lectins in plants do seem to be extremely damaging, as I mentioned, with gluten and autoimmunity. So it can also mimic other hormones like insulin. We talked about how important insulin was. Certain lectins can actually bind to the insulin receptors 5 times more tightly than insulin and get the same insulinogenic response as insulin, actually a larger one, and can even bind to leptin as well directly, causing leptin resistance and dysfunction, just like we see in insulin-resistant and damaged metabolically sick people, like we discussed before. And I hope I impressed upon people just how important that is to not do that. We've even seen lectins track up the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is sort of that gut-brain connection, and the vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. It comes down from your brainstem, goes down, and attaches to your gut. It's actually a part of your gut. They call it a second brain. From a development point of view, it's actually our first brain. That was the first nervous system that actually developed in our species, or in life, way back. And actually, our brain, as we think of it now, is actually secondary. That actually came on, millions and millions and millions of years later. But either way, the vagus nerve connects the two. So it's actually really important. But people would have such bad ulcers before we figured out that was driven by Helicobacter pylori, that sometimes the only treatment you had was just actually to cut the vagus nerve. They did this for decades. And that's significant here because it tells us a bit of information. It's probably the wrong thing to do, but definitely the wrong thing to do. But it's interesting here because we know that lectins can actually track up the vagus nerve and get into the brain and damage the substantia nigra, which is when you damage the substantia nigra, and you can develop Parkinson's. So we know that lectins can do that, and the idea is that, maybe this is contributing to Parkinson's. Well, in the Netherlands, they actually did a study where they looked at all the people in the Netherlands that had a vagotomy, that had their vagus nerve cut for the ulcers. over a 25-year period. And they found that of all those people that got their vagus nerve cut, they had a 66% reduction in Parkinson's. They'd still get it, but 66% less of the time. So it's not the only cause of Parkinson's, but it could be a contributing factor. And that's something to really, really think about, especially now that Parkinson's and other neurodevelopmental issues are screaming past what they've ever been before. So I sort of touched on a lot of lectins, but they can damage the gut lining, they can cause leaky gut, and this can allow other chemicals and molecules and bacteria and other sorts of things that aren't supposed to be in your body to get in your body. And that can cause very serious harm and disease and autoimmunity. It can increase, they can bind the toll-like receptor, increases inflammation. We talked about autoimmunity, this idea of molecular mimicry. They've sort of started to blame, this is one of the things that vegans try to blame meat on for. I literally heard this, this put forward that you shouldn't eat meat because there's this molecular mimicry and you get leaky gut, and they even had to begrudgingly admit that it comes from lectins, from plant toxins, that you get leaky gut, like gluten. And so you get this leaky gut from there, and then these meat proteins get in your body, because we're made of meat, and this is meat, it's close enough to our own body that we make these antigens towards them, and then we get cross-reactivity. Okay, well, we already know that that doesn't happen because our body doesn't do that. Our body can't do that, it's incapable of that. Our immune system is incapable of doing that. But again, lectins could absolutely be the precipitating cause that is now attacking our organs, and our body's trying to defend against it, and our organs are getting hit in the crossfire. We call that autoimmunity. Salisbury steak. Did anybody have a Salisbury steak before? Did anybody know what that is? Yeah. Does anybody know where that comes from? I always thought it was like a place name, like Salisbury, England. But it turns out it was named after Dr. J. Salisbury, who was a New York doctor in the 1800s who did a 30-year project on human nutrition and optimal health. And he found that people that were, this is long before processed foods, people that were eating just more grains and more plants were getting diseases other people simply weren't. They're getting autoimmunity. They're more susceptible to tuberculosis. They were getting gout. They're getting all these sorts of chronic issues that really didn't affect people who ate less plants. And he found that he could cure them by putting them on a pure red meat and water diet. So he was curing people with rheumatoid arthritis, with Crohn's disease, with ulcerative colitis, 100 years before we had a treatment that had any sort of beneficial effect. And he lived with the Native Americans in the Great Plains, like the Cheyenne, who were largely just eating bison. They would scare a herd of bison over the cliff. They would crash and burn. They'd dry the meat, mix it with fat. It was very fatty. So all these other people that say, well, yes, our ancestors were eating meat, but it was really lean meat. Game is really lean. No, there's no marbling because they're not sick. There's plenty of subcutaneous fat, intra-abdominal fat, and that's mixed with, or that's eaten, and that's also mixed with the lean meat to make pemmican, which is 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. So it's actually 80% calories from fat. So it's very fatty. And they were not getting any of these diseases, just like anthropologists have noticed later that they just don't get these diseases of civilization, right? And they were also living to be 110, 115, 120 years old. Why the hell is that? They just must be lying, right? Except that now we know as geneticists that we are designed to live 120 years on average based on the length of our telomeres. Meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special. So why the hell are we dying in our 70s and 80s? That's literally middle age, and we're saying that's good. All we got into his age, oh, that's a pretty good life. No, the hell it's not. That's 40 years early. And if you die in your 80s, if you die 40 years early, it means because the last 40 years before that, you were sick and you were suffering. And that pisses me off because it doesn't need to happen. So these cyanogenic glycosides, they're in so many different things, so many staples. This is a cassava root. This is something that Richard mentioned. I won't sort of belabor the point because he's already covered a lot of this. But this is the staple calorie source. It's the number 1 calorie source for 750 million people around the world. It's the number 3 most important calorie source in the tropics, in all of the tropics. So it's in everything. There's veggie chips in Australia that have tapioca and cassava. There's cassava chips you can get all over Indonesia and Bali and Southeast Asia and things like that. And there's bitter cassava and sweet cassava. Sweet cassava you can just eat, but it still has cyanide in it. The bitter cassava has so much cyanide in it that it will kill you if you don't treat it properly. But even treating it properly doesn't get rid of all the cyanide, or if you eat the sweet cassava, it doesn't get rid of all the cyanide. Quite often they're growing the bitter cassava because the animals don't eat it either, right? So this is natural insecticide and pesticides, right? So they grow this cassava. Some animals might dig it up and eat it if it's the sweet kind, but the bitter kind they don't touch because it'll kill them, right? Why aren't we thinking about that? That should be a clue. But we treat it, we try to lower the toxic load and lower the cyanide load, but that doesn't get rid of it. And low-grade exposure, sublethal doses of cyanide over years are known in medicine to cause end organ failure, thyroid dysfunction, and neurological damage. Especially when people are not meeting their minimum standard requirements for protein. And that's most of the world, especially in the tropics, especially in the third world, where this is a staple of their diet because it's a necessity. Eating plants was a necessity for some people. It was survival food. It was not optimal. It was because we had to do it to survive. And we were able to, and that gave us a survival advantage, which I think is very important. And so a lion, if it runs out of its prey, it dies, right? It can't switch to cassava. It's not going to go around fermenting things, right? But we can, so that gave us a survival advantage. So that's great. But we need to recognize it for what it is. It's survival food. It's if you have to because you're dying. It's not for optimal health. It is certainly not going to help you lose weight, except all your weight. It's going to kill you. All right. This is something that we need to respect. We should respect all life on Earth and respect it for what it is. And plants should definitely be respected. Almonds have cyanide in them as well, as little as 1 to 2 pounds of almonds eaten in a day can kill you. I've sat down and eaten a half-pound bag of Costco almonds just watching TV, and I was like, Jesus Christ! And I was like, have a lethal dose. Probably not for my size. I probably have to be on the sort of 3-pound end of things to start getting some serious harm. But it's concerning. I mean, just because it doesn't kill you, it doesn't just start damaging you right at lethal dose. It's damaging you the whole way. And so one of the things that cyanide does is it damages your mitochondria. It stuffs up the electron transport chain in your mitochondria so they don't function properly. A lot of the metabolic distress and chronic diseases are now being understood to be mitochondrial disorders. And cyanide directly damages your mitochondria. Direct toxicity, so you have North American water hemlock. That's the most poisonous plant in North America. The leaves are not that big. So that flower sort of that big. The leaves are tiny. Half a leaf can kill you. It blocks the GABA receptors in your brain, which calm down your brain. And so you get intractable seizures that do not stop, and you die within 1 to 2 minutes. Plants really don't want you to eat them. And it's not that they're necessarily trying to kill you. They just have no problem killing you if it means that you don't get to kill them. Like anything else. A moose doesn't want you dead because it hates you from your old neighborhood, right? But if you get close enough to it, it's going to find you as a threat, and it will kill you to protect itself. Plants will do the same thing. Oxalates, this is something that a lot of people do know about. These are defense chemicals that plants have been using. They're antifungicidal, they're antimicrobial, they're anti-people too. They're not good. They damage you. They are also an anti-nutrient. They can bind to different minerals and other nutrients to make it so you can't absorb them, you can't use them. They actually get into your bloodstream, turn into oxalic acid, and they actually pull out different minerals, iron, calcium, etc. It's the leading cause of kidney stones. 65% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. And so that's something that we need to respect. It's very difficult to denature them or cook them out or do these other sorts of things. There are ways. I found in a nutrition book from 100 years ago, they knew all about oxalates then. There's a lady named Adele Davis, who was one of the premier nutritionists at the time. She was very, very far ahead of her time. And I actually found an excerpt where she was talking about how you would never eat raw spinach because the oxalate composition was just so toxic. And so the way you eat them, the way you prepare them, is by poaching them, cooking them in milk. Because there's calcium in the milk that draws out the oxalates, it binds to the oxalates, denatures them, or neutralizes them, and then you can eat them if you have to. This is something, through technology, we've been able to figure out how to eat plants that we have no business eating. We don't have the genetic design for it. The simple fact that we have to ferment things, we have to poach things in milk, we have to soak them in lye, we have to go through a process called nixtamalization, which is a 7-step chemical process to break down and prepare corn so that it's edible, which is what they did in Mesoamerica. And then we took the corn, but we didn't take the nixtamalization, which is where the word tamale comes from. We had to do that because we don't have the enzymes necessary to break these things down. We don't have the defenses against these toxins. We don't have the ability to bring out and break down these nutrients properly. And so we have to go to technology to get that. So that is further proof that we are not designed to eat these things biologically, whether that's from a creator or nature or evolution or whatever. Our bodies are not set up to eat these stupid things. And we figured out a way to do it so that we can survive, but they were definitely not doing it to thrive. There's a study in the 1950s with spinach, and they tried to get people with low calcium to eat a lot of spinach, because there's actually, if you put spinach through a mass spectrometer, you'll see there's a lot of minerals and vitamins, tons of stuff, but they're bound up in ways that we can't access. That's another way of plants defend themselves, by just being less bioavailable. And so, and you also get the bad with the good, right? So tons of calcium in spinach. So they gave people spinach that had low calcium, and they found that their calcium went down, not up. Why the hell is that? Well, it's bound up in ways that we can't access or not bioavailable, but also they have oxalates, which get into our bloodstream, bind to our calcium and strip it out. So our calcium actually goes lower. So plants don't want to be beneficial when they're eaten. They try to poison you, but they also, like, how am I as least beneficial when this person eats me? If they do that, they get through my defenses. I don't want to help them, because then they're going to thrive, they're going to survive, they're going to come back and eat my family next. And they're going to make stupid little ratty, sticky kids that are going to come back and eat my kids, right? And so they don't want to do that. And so they try to be as harmful as possible for you to eat them and not beneficial, or they screw up your hormones so you can't have kids in the first place. Tannins, these are digestive blockers. They block our digestive enzymes. They can slow growth, cause liver necrosis. These are like in wine and grapes, these sorts of things, right? You think grapes are fine, right? Avocados, those are great. Both avocados and grapes will kill cats and dogs. Why is that? Because they're toxic. It's just that we have more defenses against those toxins, like tannins. There's a lot of different kinds of tannins, but the specific tannins that are in grapes, we have more defenses towards them than cats and dogs do. But tannins can also denature proteins. So if you have a glass of wine with your steak, those tannins will bind to the proteins and they'll denature them so you can't break them down. Normally you'd absorb 98% of the meat that you eat, as long as you don't eat it with plants with all these anti-nutrients and tannins, etc., or fiber that will block out the absorption and degradation of these nutrients. Seed oils are sort of a hot ticket item at the moment. There are a lot of people trying to say that, seed oils are totally fine. They're an industrial lubricant. These were invented by the Germans to lubricate U-boats and tanks at the end of 1800s and early 1900s. It was bought by Procter & Gamble. The technology of hydrogenating vegetable oil was bought by Procter & Gamble in 1911. And then they paid the equivalent of $20 million to the American Heart Association decades later to lie and say that seed oils and Crisco were heart healthy and good for you, and butter and lard and animal fats were bad for you. There was no evidence for which to base that upon. They just pulled it right out of their pocketbook, really. And that $20 million equivalent infusion at the time launched them to national prominence. This is not a government body. This has not been sanctioned by anyone. This was a private enterprise, just like the American Diabetics Association. It's just a couple of doctors that got together and said, hey, we should make the Heart Association. We should make the Diabetes Association. Now they're extremely powerful, and people listen to them as if they're authorities. They're a private entity. It's like listening to, Nabisco and say, oh, what should we do, Nabisco? Well, you should eat Nabisco products. Love you guys, Like, that's the same thing. They're making this stuff up. It's their own personal opinion. They answer to no one, right? And they're bought and paid for. They're absolute shills. So, that's something that was another one. I found a study in the 1970s where they actually tried to use seed oils instead of immunosuppressants for organ transplants, and actually worked really well. And so they're actually using seed oils for a while instead of immunosuppressants because the seed oils were such strong immunosuppressants. But it actually made the patients so sick that they had to stop it and had to go back to good old healthy immunosuppressants. It's like, you can't make that shit up. Swear to God. And now we eat that stuff, right? I mean, like, what are you doing? Like, this is a medication that, that completely destroyed people's immune systems. And now we're just eating this. Oh, it's really good for you. It's not. It is definitely not. There's hormone disruptors. Soy has a ton of these things. They say that, well, don't eat meat because it has so many hormones in it. I have had patients who have come to me and said that their oncologist told them because they had hormone-sensitive breast cancer, they could never eat red meat again because of all the hormones, and they should eat soy instead. Right? What the hell is wrong with these people? They're passing themselves off as experts, and they are to a degree in certain areas, but they need to stay in the damn lane, or at least look it up, because in hormone-treated beef, 3 ounces of lean hormone-treated beef, there is 1.9 nanograms of estrogen. In non-hormone treated beef, there's 1.3 nanograms. Okay, so that's 50% increase. Oh, that's scary. Oh my goodness, 50% more. Okay. Put that into context, because the birth control pill has 35,000 nanograms. A fertile woman will make almost 500,000 nanograms of estrogen a day. And 3 ounces of soy can have as much as 200,000 nanograms. So why are we telling people to not eat meat when it has next to no hormones, and instead eat plant proteins that are going to have hundreds of thousands of nanograms, hundreds of thousands of times more estrogen? It's insane. Flaxseed has even more than that, actually. That should be 1.9, sorry. They also have protease inhibitors. They're more nutrient blockers. So soy and wheat have protease inhibitors that block protease, which is an enzyme coming from our pancreas and helps, well, it's the only thing that will allow us to break down protein so you can absorb the constituent amino acids, and that blocks that. And so you say, ooh, you want to get all your protein from soy, you don't want to eat that, ooh, horrible meat. And then you're getting this stuff. It's not bioavailable in the first place. It's very low bioavailability. And then you're getting protease inhibitors on top of it, and you're getting even less bioavailability, and you're turning into a full-breasted woman. There's actually case reports of men who have grown breasts with just drinking 8 glasses of soy milk a day. That's enough estrogen to grow breasts in a man. That has happened. That's in the published literature that people have done that. That's how much estrogen is in there. Phytates, again, are anti-nutrients. These will block different vitamins and minerals and so on that we can't block, that we can't break down these compounds. I heard one argument saying, oh, but our microbiome, there's certain bacteria in there that you may or may not have that may or may not be able to break phytates. Okay, well that's super, but we don't absorb things in our colon. We absorb things in our small intestine. By the time it gets to our colon, it's too late. And so even if the microbiome then does break apart those phytates, well, then you just have bioavailable poop. It's not going to be, unless you want to be like a gorilla and just eat your feces. Like, it's really not going to do anything for you. Like I leave that for the vegans. I don't need to do that. Fiber is an anti-nutrient as well. Fiber, soluble and insoluble fiber form a sort of a lattice structure in your gut, and they block out protease, lipase, other enzymes from getting to your food and breaking it down. They also block the absorption of those nutrients into your gut lining. They can block the absorption of up to 30% of the nutrients. And so when you have studies that say, oh, okay, well, this can lower your blood sugar or something else. It's like, okay, but how is that doing it? Because you're not absorbing, it's not doing anything, it's blocking the absorption of your food. So if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates and you're eating with fiber, sure, that'll block out about 30% of the absorption. Well, of course it's going to lower your blood sugar then. It's like you ate less carbs. So of course your blood sugar is going to be down. We have a medication called acarbose, which is diabetes medication that does the exact same thing. It just blocks the absorption of carbohydrates. Metformin does that as well to a certain degree. But fiber does that. So of course it will do that. But that's how it does that. So if you're eating hot garbage, sure, fiber is probably a good idea because it will block out some of that garbage. But if you're not, if you're eating actual real food with real nutrients, you don't want that. It will block out the absorption of the real nutrients that you actually want. Can't really see what the hell that is. We'll skip it. Photosensitivity. These are these free coumarins. This is something in dermatology called phytophotodermatitis. Phyto coming from plants, photo being light sensitive, dermatitis, damage to your skin. Right, so this is something well described in dermatology. And you see it celery there, celeries, parsnips, other sorts of things in those families have compounds, these free coumarins, which will make you very light sensitive. So you can see there's someone who's just been eating a lot of celery, has been getting those damages called celery dermatitis. It's its own diagnosis. And I made a post about that because there was a young girl in the news who made the news, and there was a baby, and they gave her a piece of celery to chew on while she was teething, and the saliva was dripping down her face and sort of mixing in with the juices from the celery, and she actually got second-degree burns on her face because of this. She got chemical burns on her face because the sun light reacted with it. So she got very, very hurt by that, and they had a whole big write-up from an interview with a dermatologist going, oh yes, this is a thing, this is what it's called, this is what's happening. And they had a picture with those lines, you see those damage to that poor kid's hand there. It gets worse than that. So people have gotten second-degree burns just from squeezing limes, getting the juice and the oils down their hands. And then in this article, there's this kid with these big burns all the way down his arms. And that was just from juice reacting with the sun. That's another way that they defend themselves. And I remember posting that, and people, oh, this is bullshit. You're like, it's not me saying this. This is the dermatologist. Look it up. Phytophotodermatitis. Don't take my word for it. All citrus have these. This is why you can't eat certain citrus like grapefruits with certain medications like statins, because they are degraded and broken down by different enzymes in your liver, and those liver enzymes are also used to degrade and break down or metabolize different medications that we take, and so you run out of that enzyme because you've detoxified some plant that you've eaten. Now you don't have enough of that enzyme to metabolize your medication. You can get either too much or too little of the drug, and you can actually be very harmed by that. These are pictures of these sheep who have actually gotten into the wrong pasture. They've gotten into the wrong forage. It normally doesn't happen if they're being fed and cared for properly, but sometimes if they're stuck in a pen for too long, they'll eat plants that they don't want to eat, and they get poisoned from that. So even through the fur, they got horribly scorched, horribly burnt because of those free coumarins. So it's not just getting it on your skin. You eat these things, those free coumarins get inside of your body, and they can react with the light and make you very photosensitive and very sick. Nightshades, which are potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, capsicums, people call it as well, tobacco, belladonna, all these sorts of things. These are very high in lectins. They're very high in things like solanine and other toxins that are really trying hard to make sure you don't eat them. We knew this for thousands of years in Europe, that you just don't eat nightshades. And then a couple hundred years ago, people went to the Americas and found people in Mesoamerica who were eating some of these things, but they were doing it in very specific ways. They were vine riping them, they were blanching them, taking off the peels, taking out the seeds, and boiling the living hell out of the tomatoes. And then that's what they would eat. That's what the original Spanish and Italian and Portuguese pasta sauces are. That's how you make them. Now we're just like, ooh, the skin, that's where all the nutrients are. Seeds, that's where all the nutrients are. You need to keep those in there. No, yeah, it's fine. There's some nutrients in there. There's vitamins. That's where the toxins are too. There's barrier protection, that's where the skin is there. It wants to stop things from getting in and eating them, protecting the seed. The seed is the plant's baby. Everything protects its babies more than anything. And so when you have those nuts and seeds and all these sorts of things with all this cyanide in it, it's the same thing with tomato seeds or apple seeds. That's a plant's baby. And so if you eat that you're killing its baby. So that's where you generally find the highest concentration of toxins, which is why most sensible people would take those seeds out of there and take the skins out of there. So that's a real gate, by the way. These plants can kill. That's a garden. It's the most deadly, dangerous garden in the world. It's in England, and there are plants in there that if you just get too close to them, there are chemicals that they're eluting that if you breathe them in, you will die. And if you look it up, because there are some of the groundskeepers, the head groundskeepers who knew this, got too close, were tending it, died. There are a couple people that work there who have died just from getting too close to these plants. They do not want you near them, right? Because you might kill them. Just like if you get too close to a moose or a bison, it will stomp you out. Same thing goes with plants. So plants do contain nutrients, right? But no nutrients that you can't get from eating meat. So there are nutrients that you have to have that you can only get from meat. There's nothing that you have to have that you can only get from plants. It causes harm. You get the bad with the good, right? So yes, there are nutrients in there. You can survive on them, but it comes with toxins, so you need to know how to prepare them. There's a great book from a friend of mine, Dr. Bill Schindler, called Eat Like a Human, where he talks about how humans have been eating. We've been eating meat, we've been eating organs, we've been doing all those sorts of things, and then very recently we've started adding in plants, but we use technology to detoxify and lower the toxic load, and not completely detoxify, but lower the toxic load and open up the bioavailability of the nutrients. So if you're going to do it, you need to do it like that, because you do get the bad with the good. So this is sort of something that I've put together that it's actually kind of fun that people have been sort of taking up, talking about that these modern diseases now are not diseases per se, but they're toxicities and malnutrition, a toxic buildup of a species-inappropriate diet and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely too many plants that were not designed to eat, as well as artificial ingredients and chemicals that never existed and shouldn't be in our body because they're not in nature, and not enough meat that we've been eating since humans have been humans. And fat as well. Fat has been falsely vilified. It is the most important part of your entire diet. This is the video, and we'll end with this.